diving deep, no script, no plan. And your freaking BSK, yeah, we take a stand. From the battlefield to anime dreams, breaking down history, ripping through the seams. Joystick warriors and stories untold, mixing up the real and the brave and the bold. No filter, no leash, we let it all go. Get ready, cause we're taking you below. Welcome to the tangent zone, where the thoughts run wild. Gaming, anime, history compiled. Politics, chaos, whatever we find. Unlock your mind, leave the world behind. This is the tangent zone, where nothing is known. Strap in tight, cause we're never alone.
Welcome to the Tangent Zone. As always, I am your host, Antler Freak, along with my co-host, BSK. Today we have a very special guest, Iso, one of our friends from D&D, the many games that we have played together. Today we are going to be talking about a topic very near and dear to Iso's heart. It is going to be Aleister Crowley, also known as the most wicked man on earth and the beast in history. But we are going to do a little discussion about this, and we will see where it goes from there. Iso, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So, you actually came to us with the topic of Aleister Crowley and his works and influence in history and even in pop culture. So if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Okay, well, I chose Aleister Crowley as a topic because he actually had a conservative Christian upbringing, much like myself. And he went way off the rails during the course of his life. And I find that so interesting just as a character study of who this man is. I mean, as you said, he was called the wickedest man in the world. Like, he was called that by the press, right?
Right.
And he called himself the Great Beast 666.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he was like. That's how he introduced himself. Hi, I'm Aleister, Great Beast 666. Crowley, how are you doing today?
The original gamer tag.
That's right. That's right. He was Xbox Living before the rest of us, for sure.
Right. So
Yeah.
So you said you very much had kind of the same, not necessarily the same, but very similar kind of upbringing, very staunch conservative Christian values, that kind of upbringing, and veered quite a bit off course from that as well. Obviously not to the extent of Mr. Crowley, but still is a fascinating kind of conglomeration of information between the two of you. But yeah, there's a lot of information out there about Mr. Crowley, but let's start kind of at the beginning. Like you said, he had that staunch Christian upbringing, and then where to go from there.
I mean, he was actually born into a super fundamentalist Christian sect. And if you know anything about fundamentalist Christianity, it is hardcore. Like, I came from a Pentecostal background, right, which is considered hardcore by Catholic standards. And we consider fundamentalists hardcore by our standards, right?
Right.
I mean, his dad even retired to actually preach. So like he was very, very embedded in that world from a very, very early age. But the interesting thing is that his rebellion caused his own mother to call him the beast when he was a child. So there could be an argument to be made about how much he internalized what his mom was telling him after his father died. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting to think about, especially because, I mean, that's a direct reference from the book of Revelation, right?
Right.
And to be a child and be like, you're the beast, like you are the Antichrist, right? Like, that's heavy. That's a lot.
Right. And even through all that, he still managed to, get through his childhood, do well in school, well enough to go to Cambridge and make something of himself there, at least in part. And that, I think, kind of opened his eyes to the world rather than just his little corner of it. And I know you want to touch on quite a bit of what he did one thing I thought was really interesting when I was doing my own research was how big he was into mountaineering, of all things. Like, the man loved some mountains. Like, he climbed tons of mountains, and he really kind of opened himself up to the world in that way, outside of just the religious aspect or the faith aspect, but really seeing the world and all of its wonder.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, he was quite worldly, actually. Like overall, he went a bunch of different places, and unlike, say, L. Ron Hubbard, allegedly, he actually went and did these things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, I can't. That's a whole other bag of worms right there.
That's a whole nother series of episodes
Oh
by
my God.
itself.
Well, between that, Anton LaVey, oh my God.
Oh man,
You know,
yeah.
you want to
Yeah.
look at somebody who's done something in their life, love him or hate him. Aleister Crowley did everything. There wasn't much experience in life that he didn't experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, he went for everything, anything that he could do. I mean, his whole thing was do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that drove his whole life to the point where he died destitute and penniless, right?
Yeah.
Because he lived what he preached. He genuinely believed it, which is
Right.
it's pretty interesting.
Now, I came into this discussion with the intention of having as little information about Crowley as possible, so there could be at least another party who could ask some stupid questions and also inevitably learn some stuff about Crowley without having post-hand knowledge about it. But it definitely seems from what I've heard so far about Crowley that, like, because of his very restrictive upbringing, it definitely sounds like he was the type that needed to, for lack of a better term, rebel by ruffling feathers. Like, if I can't fit, I will make myself fit. And if it makes you uncomfortable, then I'm doing my job right.
I would have to agree. And I mean, like, even going back to the mountaineering that AP was talking about, like, to be a successful mountaineer, there are certain traits you have to have, like, determination and ambition. And I mean, you have to be willing to look at something like that and be like, I can do that.
Willpower, it's also very
Yeah.
crucial. Like,
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of documentaries about free climbing, and that stuff is absolutely terrifying. Like, you have to be out of your gourd to go up a mountain without any, like, safety precautions. Like, of course, that would be like the fundamentalist version of rock climbing, like the people who go up there with just a bag of chalk. But regardless, like, those people exist, and, like, rock climbing is one of those things that, like, if something goes wrong, there's a good chance that you're not coming back.
Well, and then you're also looking at it like, okay, this is the late 1800s, early 1900s, when, the technology that we have today doesn't exist. The ropes specifically designed for climbing, the footwear, the clothing, you're going up into these super high mountains, some of them like deadly mountains with
K2's no joke.
Yeah.
I mean, K2 is like what, like a 50 feet difference from Everest or something like that. It's negligible difference.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah.
And I believe more people have died on K2 than Everest, if
its
my facts
its
are
nickname
correct.
is the Savage Mountain.
Yeah.
Like, less people have climbed K2 than Everest at this point.
Right.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
to do that with essentially subpar equipment is
Yeah.
amazing just in itself, and that kind of lends a little bit to his view of life and making the most of it, trying to find his own path, and that kind of is almost like an allegory for his life as a whole. Is he's continuously finding his own path. We can kind of touch on a few pivotal moments of his life, if you would like to, Esau. Going
Sure.
into just after college, going on, all these adventures and whatnot, to forming his own religion, his marriages, which I actually find his first marriage kind of funny, but we can get into that once we get there. But yeah, if you want to go ahead and learn us some new material.
Well, I mean, Crowley is best known for his contributions to what he called magic with a K, right? Because he specifically wanted to differentiate what he was talking about versus stage illusion. So that's where that K came from. So anytime you see it on a shirt or in Hot Topic, we have
Right.
Crowley to thank for that. And that's because of his involvement in mainly a group called the Golden Dawn, which was like an early 19 magical social club. And they practice what's called ceremonial magic. So they were all about the ritual, right?
Right.
They weren't, which differentiates itself from Wicca, which is much more like emotional based and like how you feel about it. They believed there was very definite rules you could follow to get a result.
Now, from my limited knowledge of Crowley, I do recall something about like his magic with a K, being kind of like almost like an amalgamation between like features and traits of Wiccan beliefs and other pagan beliefs, and as well as like ancient procedures and methods used in ancient alchemy. Not stealing, but borrowing some scriptures from like the Emerald Tablet, which is like ancient Egyptian.
Yep, the Kybalion. He was a remixer, right? Except he remixed culture that he was exposed to, that was outside of the norm, right?
Yeah.
Like Wicca didn't even really come around until, I mean, you could argue early 1900s, probably around the 40s through the 60s, right? Is when what we know as Wicca came about. I think a guy named Gardner, if I remember correctly. But they amalgamated all of these things, and then they added this element of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just personal vision. They placed a lot of emphasis on the personhood and the individual. So if you had a vision that this is the way something was, that's the way it was, which I'm sure led to some interesting arguments.
Yeah, I mean, it's also very oddly similar to like a lot of like Satanist beliefs as well, where it's like instead of like worshiping the devil or worshiping God, it's all about worshiping yourself and empowering yourself through belief in yourself.
Oh yeah, and I believe that Anton LaVey, his Satanic Bible, was heavily influenced by Crowley and his beliefs. The OTO and Thelema and everything that goes along with that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Big time. Except he added Anton LaVey just added a fun circus element. He added the carnival aspect that drew people in. You didn't have these weirdos in hoods and robes in a locked room pointing wands at each other anymore. You know what I mean?
Speaking
like eyes wide shut type of moment.
Speaking of the pointing wands at each other, one thing that I learned again in my my research was that I guess at one point he had gotten into it with somebody kind of in that same realm, and they were going to have like a magic duel or something. And when Crowley showed up, he ended up getting Sparta kicked down some stairs.
Yep.
I laughed so hard when I saw that. I was like, I mean, I cast foot to the chest.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, right? Can you imagine just walking on the other side of the street and you have these dudes in robes outside being like, I am the Aeon of Horus, not you. And they're just like, what the what is happening, right? I'm pretty sure the police got called at some point.
Yeah, they did. And I don't think anybody ended up actually ever getting arrested. It was just, go home.
No, because the officer showed up and was like, what? Like, don't you have like a wizard lawyer? Like what's going on here? You know what I mean? Can you imagine? Just
pure flabbergasted.
Yeah, because I mean, these guys believe it, right? They literally believe they are casting spells on the stairs of this building.
Yeah, it's essentially like a Jedi battle without the siege.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, could you imagine?
And I mean,
I'm just trying to go home from the theater and I see this. I'm like, no, I'm gonna go the other way.
Yeah.
Or just like, not this again, right?
Right.
Like, I'm sure this happened more than once.
Why
It
is this
had to
becoming a
have.
thing?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just like people walking around naked on the street and they're like, oh yeah, it's those wizard guys over there.
Yeah, they're a little
Doing their
kooky.
thing. Yeah. But I mean, he met a lot of very important people there, because I mean a lot of people were a part of the Golden Dawn. Like
Hmm.
even the poet Yeats was a member of the Golden Dawn, right?
Right.
Arthur Edward Waite was a member of the Golden Dawn, and he's probably best known for the Waite Smith tarot deck,
Hmm.
which is by far the most common tarot deck you see. I mean, you could find that for, like at a dollar store. Which actually inspired Crowley to do his own tarot deck with a different artist. It's pretty interesting art. It's called the Thoth Tarot.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And it's interesting because it people have a reaction to that deck,
Hmm.
right? Like if you know nothing about it and you show someone some of those cards, you have a visceral reaction, whether good or bad.
Yeah,
It's pretty powerful art.
it really is. I know some of. It's good that he got somebody else to do the art, because Crowley himself was a terrible artist.
Yes.
I think he got it. He got his point across in his artwork, but yeah, the technical talent was not there.
No, not for what he wanted to do. Not even close.
Right. Yeah, and all this basically happened, like I said, before his first marriage. I mean, kind of get into that as well, in that he was very good friends with his wife's brother before he met her. And I believe he was like living with them or something shortly after he had come back from I believe one of his mountaineering expeditions, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that. But I know that he was staying with them at one point while her brother was working on something, and that's where they met. Ended up becoming a marriage of convenience, so that she didn't have to marry somebody else or enter into an arranged marriage. And then, it kind of helped Crowley quite a bit in building his philosophy and his marriage, or not his marriage, but his religion and his spiritualism as well. If you would like
She
to
was
touch
all
on
in.
that. Yeah, she was.
Yeah, she was super all in, which is an interesting thing, because if you look at pictures of Crowley, you don't really pick up on the charisma that he so clearly must have had, right? Like you look at him, you're like, oh, okay, like he just kind of looks like an average early 1900s dude. Like I wouldn't even call him particularly attractive, but apologies. But he clearly must have had truckloads of charisma for the things. I mean, he had patrons, right, who paid for his housing, who gave him houses, right? Men gave him their wives, like
Yeah,
on a regular basis.
some men
Like
gave
just
them themselves.
yeah, well, yeah, crazy. Like Crowley was clearly, and I don't even know if this was a term back then, but he was clearly bisexual,
Oh yeah,
right? Like
absolutely.
he,
I believe he was banned from a couple countries because of that.
they considered him a moral danger, which I
Yeah,
mean, let's be honest, he probably was, but not because he was bisexual. It's all the other stuff that he was
yeah,
doing.
that was the
You know,
least
this
controversial thing about him, even by that
like
time
this is
standards. Yeah.
Oh yes,
like
definitely.
like this is drawing some strange parallels, and forgive me if this is like out of left field, but this is like drawing some strange parallels with like Rasputin, like Grigory Rasputin. Like he was also another individual who like had very eccentric belief systems, but also had like a crazy following. People were like throwing themselves at him at one point. Like he was like super popular and arguably maybe also bi as well. Like I'm seeing a lot of like similar like parallels with like the maybe it's the status of power that he gave himself, that Crowley gave himself, that kind of attracted that type of like fan base, for lack of a better term. And like, you could say like the same thing with some of the famous serial killers in the last 40 years, like Like
Bundy.
some of them got, yeah, like but Ted Bundy, like he got like a crazy following because he was very charismatic and he was very engaging, and it was enough for people, or at least some people, to overlook just the the sea of red flags.
Hmm.
You know, and the same thing happened with Crowley. The same thing happened with Rasputin. Like it's kind of strange how like these like ties can be seen, and I thought it was kind of an interesting pattern that I saw.
I do think there's something to be said about. So there's some people in history who have this like dark charisma,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like a historical example would probably be Vlad Tepes.
Yeah.
Um, his country people love him, adore
Mm.
him, right? This is a man who impaled tens of thousands of people, but his countrymen love him because they believe he did what was necessary.
Hmm.
Um,
Um,
Yeah.
just to
It
give
was
out
the point.
just to give out a clarification for people who are not in the know, Vlad Tepes was essentially the original Vlad the Impaler, who Dracula was based off of.
Many different
Just
names:
so
Vlad Dracula, Vlad Drac, Vlad Tepes,
well,
Vlad the Impaler.
uh,
so many
apparently
names.
Dracul was Tepesh. He was considered Dracul, and Dracula is apparently in translation means son of Dracul. So Dracula was the son of Dracul, which I
Makes
believe
Which I
sense.
believe
was
means the
what?
dragon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think it's Transylvanian, if that's a
Yeah.
language. You know,
yeah,
if
It'd
not,
be like
someone
Romanian.
correct me. Right.
um,
Um,
yeah.
Eastern
I'm pretty
European,
sure.
definitely.
Yeah, so like I think in like rough translation, it means like dragon. Dracula is son of the dragon.
Yeah.
Um, and
Which was
yeah.
seen as a noble creature
Right.
Oh yeah.
in
I mean,
European Eastern European mythology. It was seen
well,
as a noble creature.
I'm pretty sure even in Norse mythology, like dragons were seen as like, you know, not just like a beast, but like something of like vital importance to their mythos.
Well, it was great power. I mean, you look at, um, Jormungandr, the world serpent, um,
Mm.
Fafnir, who was supposedly slewed by Sigurd. Um, there's a lot of parallels there as far as dragons representing raw power.
Oh yeah.
And kind
Oh,
of
even
a power divorced of morality,
Yeah,
right? Like Jormungandr wasn't good or evil; it just was.
was. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
kind of
and,
neutral
and
territory.
yeah, and I think that those are good archetypes of the kind of dark charisma that I'm talking about. That people like Rasputin and
Right.
Crowley, and I mean, you could even argue someone like Henry Kissinger, right?
Hmm.
For a more modern example, who have this sort of charisma that you're like, why? But they get things done, like they accomplish things.
Hmm.
You
It just
know,
so happens that Crowley was completely devoted, heart and soul, to his study of magic.
yeah. One could also argue that it's a characteristic of what is classified as a dark empath, a very empathetic person that uses their emotional intelligence to manipulate for bad things, essentially.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that you could definitely argue, and I'm not clinically trained in any way, shape, or form, but I would argue that there was an element of sociopathy to
Hmm.
Crowley, because he was willing to chase his goal of enlightenment in his mind, to the detriment of everything else and everyone
Yeah.
else.
Oh yeah, or almost like a antisocial personality disorder,
Mhm,
which I
Yeah.
think
mhm.
is like the I think that's like the modern title for like psychopathy,
Hmm.
Yeah,
or like yeah.
yeah, and I mean, and the stories are crazy, right? Like when he ended up founding his own religion, right, Thelema, which, long story short, it basically happened over like 3 days in Egypt with his wife, and he was like, "Oh, I had a vision." And that's how we got what we now know as the Book of the Law, which kind of is the precursor to Thelema and his own take on, because Thelema is an evolution of like the Golden Dawn beliefs in the way that like Islam is an evolution of Christianity, right?
Mhm.
One led to the other,
I think
and but you see the extent, the mistakes that he made when he actually established an abbey of Thelema in Italy, and the stories are, I mean, they would make the Playboy Mansion look like, you know, your Aunt Betty's. Like, it's
which
unbelievable.
the abbey was literally like an apartment. It was like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was like a duplex or something like that. Like it wasn't anything special. But it was kind of the center of, for lack of a better term, the craziness that was Aleister Crowley and his beliefs and his followers.
Kind of like the epicenter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was Mecca for them.
Yeah.
And it really
It was a
didn't
Vatican
make
of
any
hedonism.
sense. Yeah. I know that he practiced what he called sex magic, which was, you know, essentially ritualistic sex, whether that be male, with men or women or both, or groups, or even coaching other people while they were doing it, sort of like a voyeurism kind of thing.
Definitely, this is definitely giving me some eyes wide shut, like
Right,
flashbacks.
right.
But the interesting thing is, like, it almost wasn't for sexual pleasure, right? Like, it was in a sense, but Crowley's goal was to harness, because he believed that the moment of climax, right, is a moment of incredibly powerful energy release.
Mhm.
And speaking as a man, I can certainly say it feels like that.
Well, I can kind of broach that a little bit. I've done a lot of research.
Of course
At
you
one
have.
point, I did it. Yeah, I mean,
All
but
those documentaries on Pornhub, right?
it's the drum solo for me. But 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 there's a lot of cultures that put a lot of emphasis in what we colloquially know in the modern day as post-nut clarity. You can look back at it to like the French term for it, which it was petite mort, which means the little death.
Mhm.
Le petit du mort.
Yeah, exactly. Which meant the little death, which had a different meaning at first, but was eventually incorporated to mean essentially post nut clarity, like the bliss, the kind of different like perspective that you get post orgasm. You know, and but that's just a very specific example of like different cultures and their viewpoints on that type of thing. And it could be seen around the world, and some
Mhm.
see it as like almost like a religious event, and some see it as a filthy thing. Like it's very interesting to kind of create a juxtaposition between the two.
It kind of makes
It
a lot
is
of
interesting.
sense in that, like, I think outside of like actual enlightenment, it's probably like the closest a person could get to enlightenment was that few minutes just after orgasm. So, you know,
Yeah,
you have that clarity, and everything makes sense for
Yeah.
just that
Amen.
small amount of time. And that in itself can be a very, especially if you're in that kind of a culture, can be a very eye-opening experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
religious or spiritual event. No, especially when you compound that with like, you know, a lack of knowledge that you would have had back in the day, you know, of modern day science about how orgasms and stuff like that actually work, and how brain chemistry works, and all that. Like it was a huge mystery, you know, like 100 years ago or more, maybe even 50 years ago. It because of a lot of different factors, including the Christian Church. You know, sex was seen as like a horrible and ugly thing that was, you know, meant specifically for reproduction, and then that stifled our ability to truly understand it, which led to a lot of misunderstandings. But like you go back like 100 or 200 years or even more, you know, how it kind of makes you wonder, like, how did people view those things back then? Like, without having that knowledge, without having that understanding, it could easily lead someone to think that this is actually a spiritual experience I had. This is
Absolutely.
actually a religious experience I had. Like, I reached out and I touched heaven for a moment. Like, that type of euphoria from a physical situation.
Hmm.
Like, I can easily see how that can be seen or understand it as like a spiritual or religious event.
Hmm.
So, wow.
I agree. And I mean, and he pushed. I almost think of Aleister Crowley as an early 1900s troll. He knew that he was pushing the envelope, and he knew that he was pushing those buttons inside of the envelope as hard and as fast as he could, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
At every opportunity, he tried to push those limits. And I mean, and I do believe part of it is because of his conservative upbringing, because when you have a conservative upbringing, at least in my own personal experience, you aren't exposed to things that you need to be exposed to from an educational perspective. So when you are finally exposed to them, they hold a special fascination.
Hmm.
And I believe that Crowley never got past that.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of circles all the way back to what I said at the beginning of our podcast when I first made mention of like my initial opinion of what you guys talked about Crowley's upbringing, about how like he was. It seems like he lashed out from his restraint and with intention, with full purpose. His main mission was to ruffle feathers because he was so stifled growing up, and that was his way of branching out, reaching out to a world that he was not allowed to interact with back then.
Oh,
Right.
100%. He called himself the great B666, coming from a religious background, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
he knew that that was going to really make people upset.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well,
And personally, I believe that when he did that, and if his intentions were essentially pure in his mind, he was trying to essentially change the meaning. Like that the great B666 wasn't necessarily the devil or Satan or Lucifer or whatever. It was just another deity.
And
And
that's
that
magical
he
thinking.
himself, yeah, and that he himself
yeah.
has taken that role because there's in his mind there's multiple deities. He is definitely polytheistic,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
especially within because a lot of his stuff was based in Egyptian theology, which
And pagan.
is yeah, and paganism. Which Egyptian theology is paganism, but I think it's more of him trying to take those cultures and those belief systems and make them make sense to himself.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the polytheism, because I think an argument could be made that fundamentally he was still monotheistic. The impression that I get, and when you read his writings, it's very much left up to interpretation. It's very interesting to read. But the male and the female that are involved in the ceremonial magic are generally seen as two sides of the same one.
Right.
And you kind of see that some in his writings where he refers to like the one and things of that nature. It's almost like he was trying to shove a polytheistic square inside of a monotheistic circle. You know what I mean?
Right. And honestly, since you kind of mentioned that, like especially with your upbringing, and very much with mine, very similar. I grew up as an Irish Catholic. I was baptized as a Lutheran. I grew up as a Catholic, and now I'm Norse heathen. Trying to reconcile an entire lifetime of new polytheistic belief system is very difficult to do, and trying to get your mind to wrap around it is kind of an issue sometimes. And I'm sure it's very similar with you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's very much it's interesting that I switch off my outline and suddenly I'm in the dark. um,
The white sheet puts off a lot of light from
a lot of light.
I just read what the prompter tells me.
Right. I'm Ron Burgundy, but and that's why, like, when I say I walked away from Christianity, I walked away from the dogmatism of it. Because when I really started doing my own research, and when I really started digging into stuff like the historicity of the Bible, right? Like, yeah, there's some stuff that's historically accurate. There's also stuff that's totally not accurate and not even close to being accurate, right? It leaves out a lot of different things, like the fact that there is a female God presence in the Jewish faith. I mean, now it's typically referred to in Kabbalah, right? Which is like the mystic Gnostic version of Judaism, and very complicated. Kabbalah is a whole other topic.
Right.
But Shekinah, and I'm sure I'm butchering that because I do not speak Yiddish, was considered the female presence, but that's completely ignored in the Bible. And it's because the Bible was put together by people, right?
Yeah, it was like a bunch of people, including Constantine, right?
Yeah, it was put together by people who had an agenda.
Yeah, it was like a whole bunch of people in one giant like room yelling at each other. It was like Parliament back then, and people like just yelling at each other about what they want to include into the Bible, what they want to exclude, and like, oh yeah, like, I could go off on this.
A lot of that, you look at what Constantine did in translations, and then King James took that translation and then pick and choose what he wanted in the Bible, which is how we get the King James Bible today, which is the most popular Bible amongst Christianity. And when I look at that, because like coming from a Catholic background, we didn't use the King James Bible. We used the New American Version, which
America.
I think it included a lot more than the King James Bible, which is why I kind of look at that one a little bit more. But like I said, when I was kind of reconciling my own beliefs, I started looking at the Bible as a novel, and even more so than a novel, a self-help book. Because if you actually look at a lot of the lessons within the Bible, it is a good story about how to live your life. If you do these things, more than likely you're going to be pretty happy, which I don't see a problem with. Now, basing your entire existence on stories in a novel doesn't make sense, especially with you said the inaccuracies of it.
And I mean, and to a degree, I agree with that. But my biggest thing, and I have this problem with anybody of any faith, stop shoving it down other people's throat. I don't care what you are. I don't care what you are, because I don't want, because I look at Christianity and it did a lot of good for me in terms of it gave me a moral foundation that I could then re-examine and determine if it still fit in my life instead of having nothing. And I do appreciate that, right?
Yeah.
But where I really start to have a problem with, like I said, with any faith of any kind, with proselytizing, is when you start shoving it down other people's throat and when you start using it to make decisions that impact other people.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I expand that to everything, every aspect of my life. It doesn't matter if it's religion, your dietary needs, anything that you choose to vomit out onto someone, especially with no consent. It's just wrong, in my opinion. It doesn't matter if it's religion or if you're a vegan. Like, I don't care. I was talking about, talking about sports.
Still gonna get
How did you... Oh, I don't care. Do not care.
I'm like,
cut this out.
Like, my parents are now vegan, and I've been vegan from time to time. I've been vegetarian from time to time, but it's the extreme people, the ones that feel like it's necessary to go out of their way to just absolutely like vomit their beliefs onto you. And especially when there's absolutely no context or no like reason for that to even be brought up in conversation. The same thing applies to any form of religion. Like, I'm just doing my thing. If you come to me while I'm eating a hot dog or watching the birds or going for a hike and you stop my life, you stop my day to preach about something that you feel is necessary to vomit on me, I'm going to hate you already. Because it's not your place to stop my living for your sake. Now, if it was naturally or organically brought up, I would be happy to discuss it. But there's a fine line that separates the difference between somebody coming up and just preaching to you and having an organic conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's basically just common sense and just being a good person, in my
Decency.
opinion. Yeah, it's decency
Yeah.
or etiquette.
It's just
Like
manners.
yeah, manners, etiquette.
Yeah.
Like it's basically that. Like, I will talk about anything with everyone about at any time, but
Mhm.
if it's done properly. If you go, hey, do you have a moment to talk about Jesus Christ? And I'm like, sure. Would you like me to take him out of my basement? And that usually doesn't go well. But
They always
but
ask me they've always asked me if I found Jesus, and I'm like, why did you lose him?
yeah, did he go missing again? Like, jeez.
Yeah. And I
Um,
mean, and I think that kind of speaks to a cultural problem that we have right now. And I'm sure, I'm not as sure about Canada because as far as I'm concerned, Canada is basically like the place you get through the wardrobe.
but on the
But
other
here in
side, it's
America,
like, where am
oh, look at all this poutine, just rivers
don't
of
forget the
poutine and maple syrup.
I?
don't forget the igloos. We have
Yeah, and
that.
the
That's
igloos.
but
But we've lost the capacity to have a conversation
Mhm.
with people you disagree with. Like,
Right.
I can disagree with you and be civil. That's not a problem, but it seems to be a problem culture writ large.
I'm
I'm
gonna go
gonna
ahead.
piss a lot of people. Oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna go ahead and make a little plug here, just because it's somebody that I follow on TikTok. Actually, Moses and Sephora. They are a Hasidic Jewish couple that their whole TikTok is based around education, like educating people about Judaism and their way of life and things like that. And kind of coming back to, you're having a conversation, and that's kind of how I view their channel, is that it's not necessarily that, we asked for it. It's just that they saw something that there's a void. Nobody's really talking about this. So let's go ahead and talk about this. Why do we do this? What are these things called? Why do we wear tefillin and do prayers however many times a day? Like I said, coming from that Catholic background, there's a lot of influence from Judaism within Christianity, and it kind of helps historically to look at some of these things, because a lot of these things that they do, they did in the time of Jesus, or they did, back when the Hebrews were first forming, and just kind of their way of life, and their, not necessarily most people would call them rules. They call them having a relationship with God, and that's something
Yeah,
that kind of hit me. I was watching one of their videos, and that's exactly what they said. Is that, it's, they asked, why, how do you remember all these rules? And Moses looks up at the camera and he says, they're not rules. They're our relationship. They're our covenant with God. It's what strengthens our bond with our deity. And that kind of hit home with me. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what religion you are, you can have a relationship with your deity, or, if you're atheist, have a relationship with yourself. to try and make yourself better, whether that be through self-reflection or going to church or little rituals and things like that. Like, rather than celebrating Easter, Ostera just kind of passed a few days ago. But my wife and I are going to have a little ceremony for our mothers. My mother-in-law recently passed away, and mine, my mother passed away in '09, and we're going to have a little ceremony to honor our ancestors.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah, it is. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
fine. Go ahead.
But it's, for me, what it all goes back to is, as long as you believe in something, because my real turning point was I was having a long conversation deep at night, and I cannot confirm or deny that you're involved, but we started talking about stuff like string theory and multiverse theory and things of that nature, right? And 3 o'clock in the morning, we're just sitting there wide-eyed, staring at each other, having what we think is a profound conversation. I'm sure it wasn't. But there was a moment where it's like, okay, well, if the multiverse is truly infinite, if that's a real thing, if that's actually a thing, then the math says that all possibilities that can be are. Not only are, have been, and will be at the same time. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, again, allegedly, maybe or may not be involved. It blew my mind, right?
I mean, it's very Occam's razor.
Yeah.
Anything can happen, will happen. It kind of reinforces that thought. I love that. Like the fact that you even brought up string theory. Like I remember this one time when I was like a teen, and I may or may not, I can't confirm or deny the fact that I was on illegal substances. Me and my friend, we were having this conversation that got really deep. And then fast forward 15 years, out of the blue, my friend calls me. He goes, "Do you remember this time when you got into really deep conversation, you started like spouting out these facts about like what if everything is connected? What if there's a substance or something that connects everything together and this, that, and the other thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think I vaguely remember that conversation." He goes, "Dude, you were talking about string theory before it was even like publicized. Like, what the hell?" I'm like, sure. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that I was kind of loopy, but
No,
I
I've had that same
I don't.
conversation actually back when I was in high school. I watched
Yeah.
a documentary about it, and talking about separate dimensions that are within millimeters of our own. That basically that every decision that you could possibly make, every person, every animal, everything, uh, every decision that you could possibly make creates a split into a new
Mm,
dimension of you chose this or you chose this,
yeah,
and then it continues on from there, um, which creates, again, infinite possibilities as far as what is actually out there. So yeah, like,
yeah.
and it's a lot of people that like, deny the existence of aliens. Like, we know a very, very small percentage of what is out there. It is mathematically impossible that there is not other intelligent life in the universe.
Just to bring things down to a smaller scale, like the percentage of the ocean that we understand, or like the bottom of the ocean that we understand, is like less than 20%. We
Mhm.
know less than 20% of our own planet's bottom of our ocean.
Mhm.
And how much do you think we really know about the cosmos?
Mhm.
Like there is like probably like a googleplex of planets out there.
At
Oh yeah.
least.
Like
Oh yeah.
at
There's
least
probably solar
like
systems out there that look exactly like ours.
like
Well, and that's and
statistics.
that's. I'm sorry. Just to impact your point, right? Like, whenever a scientist talks about the observable universe, the
Yeah,
key word there is observable.
Right.
That's
yeah,
just how far we can see. We have no idea what's past any of that.
Well, within like the last 10, 20 years, we just started looking at the universe in different wavelengths, like infrared and through other forms of radiation. Like, we are discovering things more and more, and the time between discoveries is getting smaller and smaller as our awareness and our technology is advancing, which means that there's just so much to understand. Like right now, our beliefs of what once our beliefs like as of right now, our beliefs are kind of splintered into many different categories about how the universe works, and whether it's constantly expanding or if it's slowly, collapsing, or if it's going to expand to the point that it's going to collapse on itself, like, or if it's just going to infinitely expand. Like, there's so many things that, like, we have all these like amazing scientists out there with strong backings and strong like facts to prove their point, but they're contradicting each other because there's just so little that we know about the our cosmos. So like when you deal with like a number as big as like a Googleplex, which is unfathomable, like a billion, like really like a million, but like a billion is hard enough to understand, hard enough to imagine, and like a Googleplex is infinitely larger than that. And having that many planets and going like, even if there was a 1% chance of a planet having life, or less than a 1% chance of sentient life, that's still at least like a handful of planets to have sentient life out there.
Well,
And that's assuming we're in base reality.
Yeah. And then
like,
on top of that,
I mean, that's a whole nother like simulation theory. Like, are we actually in base reality, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much.
And on top of that, like you look at, okay, so what we can see is how many millions of years in the past, because of how long it takes just to get to us to see
light. The light to travel.
Yeah.
Limited by light speed.
Yeah.
Which is a distance, not a speed, just for anybody listening who may not know.
Yeah, it is a distance.
Not speed.
Yeah. It's a simple parsec,
a light
right?
year. And the fact that, like, when we're looking out there and we're seeing nebulas and we're seeing different galaxies and whatnot, those galaxies may or may not even still exist just because of the amount of time it takes for us to be able to see it. So for us to say that, other intelligent life doesn't exist out there, that's, like I said, mathematically impossible.
Yeah, I think the height of ego is what it is. Yeah. Like, it's a very humanistic, like,
we are the center of the universe. We are the sun revolves around us. It's literally impossible.
As insulting as it sounds, like, it really is a humanistic thing. Like, to believe that we are the only sentient being out there. We're the only life in this infinite cosmos. And like, I tried to tread lightly with this, but religion definitely has a huge hampering when it comes to this type of like acknowledging the fact that there may be life out there other than us. Because
I think dogmatic religion has a problem.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm meaning, though. Like, we're talking about like the extremists that think that it's this way and that's it. The people outside of what they're told to think,
and they're taking it to a point where it was never meant to go. So you're looking at religion as a way to make sense of the world around you. So there has to be something else at work, and then you start to create stories and rules and things to live by and other things like that. And then when you meet somebody else that doesn't have that same belief system and you believe that they are wrong, and now you're religion is telling you I need to convert that person to what I believe. Otherwise, they're going to burn in, everlasting
A
damnation,
lake of fire.
or
Yeah.
Yeah.
or even that they're the enemy now, that they need to be taken off this planet. Um,
Yeah.
It's the
those kinds
natural
of
it's the natural
thinking,
progression of it.
right? And
Yeah.
it's
Because
basically that in almost every form of religion, at least that I've seen, besides like specifically like Buddhism, um,
which is not a
or
religion.
Buddhism. I'm sorry, my bad.
Yeah, Buddhism
My
is
bad.
technically, and this is my well actually moment of the episode.
Mhm.
Buddhism is actually a philosophy because you yourself are seeking enlightenment.
Yes.
Not to become a deity, but I mean it's what other faiths would call a deity, right? But you don't
Yeah.
worship the Buddha or anything like that. You're just like, that dude's a good example and I want to follow it.
It's an
Yeah. I
ascension.
mean,
It's a form of trying to get yourself above
Yes.
what you are.
yeah,
Mhm.
and to kind of add to that, to like one of the things I thought was really interesting about Buddhism, and henceforth I'm going to refer to it as Buddhism, but
See the Dalai Lama just sitting there twerking.
I
Must have
mean,
seen that in those documentaries you were watching, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
right.
Buddha had his bootylicious moments, so like it's a thing. Uh, but one of the things I recall is this story about this Christian or Catholic. I don't remember exactly. He was some sect of Christianity. I think he was like a priest. He had a moment where he had encountered the Buddha, and he was so flabbergasted by this experience and so taken aback. Like he fell to his knees, he started weeping, and he was like, I will denounce my faith and believe in you from now on and forever. And Buddha says, no, I want you to continue your belief because that is what you believe. That's not what I'm here for. And of course, I'm super paraphrasing because it's been so long since I've heard the story. But the moral of it that I took from it when it comes to Buddhism is it's not about religion. It's about belief. And you can be a Christian and still believe in the teachings of Buddha,
Mhm.
or you could be any religion and still believe in the teachings of Buddha because it's just how to be a good person in a nutshell. Like it's
Mhm.
how to
Yeah.
to find proper understanding of yourself and the world around you. Also known as enlightenment or finding nirvana. Like it doesn't have to be one thing or the other, which I love about Buddhism. I mean, there's some dark stuff about Buddhism, but I'm not going to touch on that yet. But from my viewpoint on Buddhism, it's essentially just how to truly learn about who you are. And I think that's one.
Self actualization.
Yeah, yeah, or
Right.
self-realization.
Mm-hmm.
Like which go hand in hand with each other. Like
No.
and then that can be completely separate from religion. Like I think there are a lot of people out there who do treat Buddhism as a religion, but there's also a lot of people who don't. And it's
Yeah.
not my place. It's not my place to say what's right or wrong. Like I personally, I grew up in a household with a very subtle Catholic mom and an atheist father. But I only found out that my father was atheist when I was an adult. Religion was never really present in my life. And
Right.
whenever I brought up religion, what my parents would always tell me was, it's your choice. It's your journey to find your belief.
And I think that's healthy.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, yeah,
I've said it
I-
before. Like if I were to have children, I would put them in a church until they were old enough to be like, I'm done. You know what I mean? Because it would give them that kind of that foundation that they can then
yeah,
re-examine later in their life.
Yeah, the
See,
basis of morals.
like I also came up in a very unstructured life, which was more of a detriment than a positive, but that's another
Even
story. But when it comes to religion, though, because I grew up with I guess you could say, a void, a lack thereof. When I got to like high school, I started to get curious because I hear all these stories of people having like these religious and spiritual moments where they saw God, they saw Jesus, they had this moment where they just instantly knew that they needed to believe in Christ, or they needed to believe in Muhammad or Yahweh or whatever. And I found myself feeling like I was missing something. And because I felt like I was missing something, I went on a spiritual journey when I was in high school. Like, I started researching all these different religions with the intention of at least one of them might reach out to me, right? Like, statistically speaking, like if these religious events happen, maybe one of them will reach out to me, and then that's my path. That's what I have to do. I get my answer, and I'll follow it. And I looked into Buddhism, I looked into Christianity, I looked into Hinduism, I looked into Judaism, and like they're one of the things I found in the core of it. When you boil it all down, it's beautiful. It's all of them are really, really beautiful.
Mhm.
It's when the outer edges start to fray. That's when things get ugly. When things get too go too stray from
Yeah.
the core. That's when you start seeing ugliness, and it's not specific to one religion. Every religion has these fanatics, these extremists that just like muddy what the core values of the religion are. And I learned to appreciate religion as a whole, but also I learned to resent religion as a mass, because it seemed that the larger the congregation, the more misunderstandings, the more misinterpretations become solidified, and then become edicts, and then become radicalism. And it just becomes this chain reaction, because you have this like mass population effect, or this almost like a mass hysteria, where like everyone is like feeding off of each other, and turning this into turning something beautiful into something ugly.
Mhm.
You
And
remember
it
those
seems,
motivational office posters?
sure.
Yeah. So for a while, there was a company that made the biggest company that made those was called Successories, right?
Okay.
And they had like stores in the mall.
Yeah,
Back when the malls were actually financially viable.
I remember that.
Those were
But
the
there was a
days.
company that, oh yes, hanging out at the mall at the taco whatever it was at the time.
Good old mall rats, yeah.
But there's a company that made some called Depressories, and they were all plays on Successories, right? And what you were talking to reminded me of one that said, meetings. None of us is as stupid as all of us.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, in a nutshell, that kind of hits the nail on the head. Like, it's something I've said for a long time, that like us as individuals have the potential of being very, very smart. But when you put us in a group together, if you put us in a room of 100 or more people, our IQ drops by that many people. Like, it's insane. And now that we're in the era where everyone is connected, you have these opportunities for mass connection, uh, that ends up getting really fucking stupid people. And I'm sorry if I'm being harsh, but fuck you, flat earthers. Like, it's just
Like, that is the one group of people that unequivocally I'm like, you're a bunch of dumbasses. Like, I'm sorry. Like, really?
I
Like,
hate you for just
really? You
denying
actually
facts.
believe this? Like it's so insane. Like it, and I love conspiracy theories, right? I
Oh yeah, me
love
too.
them. But flat Earth infuriates me on like a cellular level.
Right. Like
my
it's so hurt.
my organs rebel at the thought of flat
Like
Earth.
the amount of times I've seen flat earthers unintentionally disprove their own beliefs
Hmm.
is
Oh yeah,
ridiculous.
and it's
And
hilarious
here's the
every
thing,
time they do
right?
it.
And
Yeah.
here's the thing, right? Like my own personal belief is I do believe we live in an infinite universe of some sort, whether it's a multiverse or an actual like one universe that's just infinite, right?
Mhm.
That's my personal belief. So with that belief, it follows that out there somewhere there might be a flat Earth. All
Yeah,
I'm saying is that this one isn't.
yeah. This one isn't, and we can prove it.
Yeah,
um,
easily.
kind of going back to what you were saying, BSK. Um, it's kind of funny when you guys are talking about this. All I can think about is Men in Black. Uh,
Hmm.
Tommy Lee Jones sitting there going, "A person is smart. People are dumb and violent, and all that." And I'm like, every time I hear someone talk about that, I'm like, "Yep, that's very very true. A
Yeah.
person is smart. People are dumb." And you were talking about kind of your experience in high school. I had a very similar experience. However, I grew up in, like I said, a Catholic community. I went to a Catholic high school. I started questioning my faith very early in my career in high school. But by the time I made it to be a senior, and of course, going to a religious school, you're going to take religion classes.
A lot of them.
I had a teacher, um, who I'm not going to name, but she tried to give me the 5 proofs of God's existence. And I was the only one in class that looked at her dead in her face and said, "You can't prove God's existence." And when she asked me why, and I said, "Because according to our own religion, you can't. It's based in faith. Faith
Yeah.
means nothing if there's proof."
Yeah, exactly.
I failed that class, but it made me really double down my questioning. And I had gotten to a point that I was like, all right, this definitely isn't for me. The good thing is that my mom was very staunch Irish Catholic. My dad was pretty much agnostic, for lack of a better term. He believed there was something out there, but he also believed that it wasn't going to be found in a house built by human hands. Um,
And I think
his
there's something to that, you know,
Yeah,
like
his church
because
was the
I'm one.
woods.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe firmly that there's a spiritual element to the universe. I don't think we can define it. I don't think that it's something that can be measured, but I think that human experience shows that when we don't believe in something, there's a void in us, whatever that may be, right? Whether it's Buddhism or Norse, right? Or anything, right? If there's nothing there, there's a void. I believe, and this, I'm willing to admit that this may be an inbuilt, like, piece of Christian indoctrination, but I do believe that we were made to believe in something. And by
Mhm.
made, I don't mean that I believe we were actually created or, anything like that, because I honestly haven't really made up my mind on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, same.
But I believe that when you believe in something, it adds color to a colorless existence.
Yeah, that's a very poetic way of phrasing it, and like for example, like my belief system, I kind of describe it like a floating raft, and it's my belief system will float based off of the sea of knowledge or the ocean of knowledge, and it will follow whatever current that knowledge offers, and because of that, it changes often, and it will probably always change.
And I can respect
And
that, like, because every person's journey is unique. That's something I also firmly believe. Like, what works for AP is not going to work for me, right? What works for BSK is not going to work for me. What works for me is what's going to work for me. And other people can help you find it, right? But that's where when you start letting other people dictate your actions, without any input from yourself, that's where things start getting dangerous, because you believe blindly.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in education, right?
Yeah, me
The
too.
more knowledge you have, I don't care, good or bad. Knowledge is amoral.
Right.
It's not good. It's not bad. You are a free thinking human. You can make up your own mind on it, right? And I think that may be a little bit of like hacker ethos.
I mean,
Well, I'll tell you
knowledge
something.
wants to be free.
In the music, the representative from Rhode Island says something when they're talking about whether or not to debate independence from Britain, and they ask him, how do you vote, whether or not to debate this issue, and the quote from the musical always kind of stuck with me is that I've never heard, seen, nor smelled an issue so dangerous that it can't be talked about.
Exactly. And the more knowledge that you have, the better decisions you can make across the board. Like, there's nothing that you can learn that makes you a worse decision maker,
Right.
unless you don't critically think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Which is why I think when you deal with like extremists and religions, now I'm a smooth brain, so I'm gonna go for the low hanging fruit and tackle Christianity. But like there's a lot of Christians out there that like are so involved with trying to ban specific books, to the kids, because it talks about uncomfortable things, or they deem it inappropriate. But at the end of the day, it's still knowledge. It's still showing people either a belief system, a mentality, or a story that one can learn from. That is removing the potential of education from the people who need it most, in my opinion. And I find it's kind of strange how a lot of these orthodox or extremist belief style people are threatened by education.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
I'm not
that's a
saying,
common thing. Like, anybody who wants to subjugate, and by subjugate, I use that term broadly to mean,
yeah,
just kind of keep someone else down, another group that isn't you. You take away the knowledge first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a problem in the American education system since, the late 1800s. It is built to make dumb, uncreative people.
yeah,
It's cranking out
which
workers. That's
kind
what
of
it's doing.
Yeah, it's cranking out factory workers.
Mm-hmm.
which leads me to my belief of how standardized testing is one of the biggest frauds
Oh yeah.
in our society. I forget who said it. Might have been Einstein who said this, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. But it's like standardized testing is like testing a fish on how well it can climb a tree.
Well, and I've always said this, and I can't remember where I heard it, but I heard it very, very young. With standardized testing, literally just tests how well you can take a test.
Yeah,
And that's literally.
And I was
it.
very
That's
good at
the
that.
only point. Yeah, I was always very good at tests.
Yeah.
I was a terrible student. If I wasn't interested, I wasn't going to do well. Period.
Well, it warps
but I
the
could
whole
pass.
educational experience.
Yeah, but I could pass any test you put in front of me.
Exactly.
It didn't matter what it was.
I was the same way, right? I was that kid who got 115% on the test, set the curve, and everyone's like, fuck you, right? But I never turned in a piece of homework. Not
Right.
one. But I tested so high, they didn't say anything about it because I was making money for the school district.
Mm-hmm. That's how I passed econ.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I passed every test that he handed me, and I never turned in any homework whatsoever. My teacher looked at the principal and said, "I can't fail him. He knows the material. Like everything I've
Yeah.
tested him on, he's gotten correctly. So why
And that
does this
speaks to the
homework make sense?"
inflexibility. Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the inflexibility of the school system, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
another name for homework is what? Enrichment.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm acing your tests, why do I have to do your homework? And they can
Well, not
never
only
answer that.
that,
And
but not only
I
that,
always said,
but
how the hell am I supposed to? If I don't get it in the 8 hours of school per day, what makes you think I'm going to get it on my own at home?
yeah, like like for me, for example, when I was in school, I wasn't the type of kid who like aced every test. I also didn't do any homework, but one of the constants was my in-class dialogue when it came to the curriculum was enough that my teachers, even though I did no homework, even though I didn't put any effort into the tests, they knew that I understood what they were teaching. But like I got my ADHD is so bad, and I'll understand something and get instantly bored, and once I get bored, my brain just goes, nope, no, I'm not doing that anymore. Fuck that. So, but when it came to like the in-class dialogue between teacher and students, I'd be asking all these really complicated questions and showing an advanced understanding of the subject that like multiple times my teachers told me you have not you have not turned in any homework, you have not done well on your tests, but I know for a fact that you know this subject and I don't want to fail you, so I'm just going to give you the bare minimum passing grade.
Mm-hmm. I lived on
Well,
that
and
when
it's
I was in high
something,
school.
well, they don't
Yeah.
teach, and that's in my opinion, the problem with schooling is they don't teach connections, right? Everything's done in a vacuum. And the reason that I say that it creates factory workers is because when that bell rings, you forget whatever you were doing and you move right on to the next class, right? You
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah.
totally forgot an hour and a half of whatever. But they don't teach
Don't.
the connections. Like, why is math and science not taught together?
Right.
Why is history and English, or whatever they call it nowadays? Because I went to high school 20 years ago. Like, what? Like, why are they not taught together? Like, why are they not placed within the context of when they took place? Because math and science are inextricable, right? You don't have science without math.
Mm-hmm.
Math, science, and biology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like,
You can't have one without the other.
because they don't want to create free thinking adults.
Mm-hmm.
That is a threat. And who it's a threat to, you can leave up to your own imagination. I have my own opinions on that. But when you dumb down a society, you end up in a situation like we're in today,
If
where
you
people
dump,
cannot have a conversation.
Right.
yeah. Well, also, if you dumb down a society enough, then you have people who are moldable enough to be your voter.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, right? Like, it's just, and that's why they're banning books, which blows my mind, right? Because there's the truism that nobody good has ever banned books. Like,
Mm-hmm.
throughout history, that has never been the side of history that people look back on and go, those were the good guys, right? It has
Who,
never happened.
who was that person back in like the 1930s, 1940s that had like this whole like book burning thing? Like, it's on the tip of my tongue.
I don't know.
I should.
It's no one
I
ever
should. I
talks about it, so
Yeah.
I'm just forgetting.
I should have paid attention more in history class.
Well, and like,
But I mean,
and
and
we've talked
that's a
about
particularly,
this kind of stuff before. Before our games and whatnot, about like our different political views and things like that. Because I'm not afraid to say, I'm very conservative.
yeah.
However, contrary to the popular belief in our society today, I'm very open minded. I want to hear others' opinions. If you can come at me with a good argument, you have a chance of changing my mind. However, it better be a good argument because I have mine and I've done my
Yeah.
research.
And the reasonable conservatives I've talked to, like you, tend to have a libertarian bent,
Very much so.
where
Yeah.
there's, like because a libertarian thing is just like, I don't give a fuck what you do as long as you're not hurting anyone else, right? So like, why would you care if someone, like, you would just stop your kid from reading that book if you didn't want him to read it?
Right. I
Which
I
is the
would take
thing
it out
that
of his
blows
hands
my
like, Rick,
mind.
this is not for you right now.
Yeah.
We can touch on
And
this later.
it's like the party that's banning books is supposed to be about small government,
Mhm.
but they're taking the choice out of the parents' hands completely
Right, which
because
I'm
of what
totally
they
against.
believe.
Right, which I'm
Well,
totally
Exactly.
this is
against. I think that the parents should have the most say, not necessarily all the say, but the most say about
100%.
what's going on. I think what keeps happening is like we've continuously talked about, is it just goes too far. So you
Hmm.
parents come up and say, well, these books shouldn't even be there for them to look at. And then you get a hard pushback from the other side saying that we're going to give these books to the kids. And it escalates and escalates and escalates till we get to a point of,
Wow.
okay, we're just going to ban them. And like, why did we get there? You know,
yeah.
And
what,
I hate it,
first, why are
because
teachers pushing something? Secondly, why are parents pushing something completely different? Why can't we work together to figure out exactly what is needed?
Yeah.
well,
Well, I
people have
mean,
forgotten that libraries are neutral,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and this is my personal experience. Like, libraries have an almost like sacrosanct position in my life.
well,
When
it's
I
been like that
moved at
forever
a
too.
Yeah, and when I moved at a very young age, I had no friends. I had nobody. Where did I go? I went to the library because it was freedom of knowledge. Anything that I wanted to learn about, it didn't matter. Like, no one had a say, right? Like, there wasn't any political party that was telling me I couldn't read this or that or whatever.
Right.
It's what, like, if I wanted to read an engineering manual, I could.
Mm-hmm.
If I
Yeah.
wanted to read a graphic novel, I could, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it's such a sacred space, and it hurts. It hurts me that there are children that will not have that.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is a sacred space, though. You know, for lack of a better term, it is a sacred space. I mean, you look at the most common joke when it comes to libraries is the power of the librarian shushing someone, right?
That was
And
absolute
if
authority, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
and if there wasn't any form of sanctity to that library, then that library would have absolutely zero power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that shushing would mean nothing. But for somehow we've gone to the point over the course of like hundreds of years that libraries were seen as like this neutral, sanctified area. It didn't matter what your creed, race, gender, belief system was. This was the library. Shut the fuck up. Like,
Yeah.
simple as
Mm-hmm.
that. You know?
They didn't care if you were millionaires or somebody off the
No.
street that couldn't afford a candy bar. If you were
Yeah.
talking, you were getting shushed. And
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you
it,
respected the space, you were allowed.
Yeah.
there's something very similar to that. It is called Freemasonry. The cool thing, I myself am a Freemason. I don't know if you can see it. There you go. But one of the
So many
coolest things,
conspiracies.
right? That was part of the reason why I wanted to join, by the way. Which about 99.9% of them are just completely false.
I'm
But
sure. I've heard.
the fact that I can sit to, like, I'm lower middle class, but I can be sitting
Yeah.
next to a billionaire, but we're brothers. You
Yeah.
know,
Because you're both
I would
seeking knowledge.
right, and that's a big part of Freemasonry. That is the point of it, is in search of more light. The light of knowledge.
Because knowledge is power.
It is.
It really
Rainbow.
is. It really is. And
The
that's
more you
something
know.
that's, and it blows my mind, right? Because I'm just old enough that I remember a time before the internet was easily accessible.
Mm-hmm.
However, my father was a techie. So by the time I was 9 years old, I was on Windows 95, doing the Control Alt arrow button and flipping the screen, and my dad coming home and like, "What are you doing to the computer?" You know what I mean?
That's why you and I get along so much. My father
Yeah.
is also a techie.
And I had, like, you guys might remember this. You remember Encarta?
Mm-hmm.
like the CD-ROM encyclopedia.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
that
That
that was
changed my life.
pre-internet.
That
You could
changed
look up
my
anything.
life. I had a
I
full set
remember.
of encyclopedia books, and when
Oh,
I got
it's
Encarta, the whole world opened up to me, and I was like, "Oh my god, I can look at anything. I can learn anything right here at my
it
computer."
was the pseudo internet experience, right?
Yeah,
It's like all of a sudden the
you could
whole
search
world.
it. You didn't have to like look at it alphabetical order. You could just type in what you're looking for, and boom, there it is. Oh my god. Oh, I miss those days. I
I
really
re-
do.
I remember. I remember booting up video games from BIOS.
Oh yeah,
Back when
MS
games were
DOS.
when
DOS
like
box
games were
now.
Yeah.
that's back when like games were on the floppy disks.
Mhm.
Like
And you had to put like 4 in.
Is that your weird, your weird
You're like, all right.
Canadian trucker game?
oh my god, yeah. Oh my god.
Everybody else
What the
playing
fuck
Oregon
was
Trail.
that?
The Canadians are playing some weird trucker game.
What's that called?
Or you told
I'm
us
Explains a
looking it up
lot.
before.
right now. I know, but it's gonna bug me until I look it up.
I feel like that's such an American experience for people of a certain age, where
Hmm.
you went to the computer lab, you were all playing Oregon Trail, you named the people after your friends, and
And
then
then
in
they
the
all died
middle
of
of the thing, you'd
dysentery.
be like, "Hey, Brian, you died of diarrhea," or whatever. Like,
Dysentery was the yeah. So the
Somebody got
game
consumption.
that
We thought they just ate too much.
right?
the game that AP was joking about is called Cross Country Canada, and it was a PC
That's what it
game that
was.
came out in 1991. And you were essentially a truck driver, and your job was to go to different locations. And it was very much like Oregon Trail, where like you had to worry about like how you got there, and like I think you also have to worry about fuel and all this other stuff, but it was very, very simple.
See, they're training us
But
to
yeah.
be factory workers. They're training Canadians to be truck drivers.
Apparently, right?
That's just how
Like,
it
I
is.
don't.
Where do you think the
It's
ice roads are?
Right?
this is why I think of Canada as Narnia, right? Like, it's just a baffling place with baffling people.
Like they're not real. It just.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I mean, they're
am
real in the sense that,
I
like, Narnia's real.
Right.
yeah, I'm just a figment of your both's imaginations. You guys are just having a podcast with each other, and you're
Totally makes
hallucinating
sense.
me.
When it actually airs, it's just a blank screen in the middle. Every once in a while, we just go quiet, and then we spout off something that like we had nothing to do.
Mass
dead
hallucination for sure.
dead silence, and both of you just start hysterically laughing.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a podcast. That'd be an art piece.
Right. Probably might
We
make
have
some
to
money
have
on that.
Yeah.
we have to have a podcast at one point where I'm just completely like grayed out. I'm completely muted, but you're both reacting to me throughout the conversation. And it's like, where's BSK? Who are you talking about?
What is that?
And just start gaslighting everyone.
I
Is
need
that
a picture.
ham?
I need to get a picture of you and put it on a T-shirt and just say Canadians aren't real.
Yeah. No. I would buy it.
Man, the bad thing is I had a
Yeah.
point and I can't remember what it was.
That's the issue with tangents.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
it's true.
Oh, I know what it was.
But it's. Go ahead.
So you guys were talking about your dads were very much techies when you guys were growing up. I was the complete opposite. My father was very much a boomer, very much against technology. Well, not necessarily against technology, but one, we really didn't have the money for it, and then it was one of those things like you don't need it, go outside, which I did quite a
Right.
bit of. But
I play outside a lot too. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I hunted, fished. That was my thing. I played a lot
I
of
wasn't allowed to
sports.
kill things.
I was encouraged to.
Yeah, after the first incident, I was told that I can't kill things anymore.
About so.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
That was
was
a
an
weird
awesome
slide. I
transition.
don't know how I feel about that.
I'm all for it. I'm gonna call that the Canadian slide.
Yeah, I gotta get the focus right. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you. And now you
Give
froze.
the camera.
That's too far. Too far. That was really weird when it froze, and then the next thing I see is that. It's like one of those jump scare things we used to get.
Oh my god! Yeah.
And I can't hear you, by the way.
Dead
we go.
silent. There we go. Welcome back.
That poor camera.
High five.
Come on. I believe in you.
No, it just doesn't want to.
Your
No, it
belief
doesn't.
is not. Your belief is not strong enough.
You look like a blurry AI painting.
You are a potato.
You know, like 18 fingers and
By the way, shout out to Ireland.
always just having all kinds of issues.
Well, yeah, I don't know what's going on with the camera. I'm sorry, gal. Let's try
okay.
this. Actual recording is higher quality. I don't believe you because I look like a blurry mess of nothingness.
And now you're just a giant E,
Well, actually,
Well-
kind of a small E.
capital E.
So what they call
Oh,
capitals,
Let me try this.
one a little pixely, and then wow.
Oh wow, Picasso would smile.
Things are happening and I don't like it.
I love the fact that you have like super bright blue headphones with
No.
like
We got a winner. There we go.
Jesus fuck.
I apologize that my camera sucks at life.
That's all right.
That's okay. That's okay. I suck at life, so
You
I had to bring up a manual tune and I had to literally focus it myself and then turn the auto focus back on.
wow.
Technology, right?
Right. Yeah. As speaking of which, as I was saying, my dad was very much a boomer, and we've got our first computer after my grandma had passed away. We got some inheritance from that, and part of that was to get a computer, and it was a Gateway. I couldn't even tell you the model, but it was like the first thing ever with dial-up internet. We didn't even have cable at that point because it was viewed as a waste of money.
Didn't they advertise with cows?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was good.
Yeah.
The cow print was a big thing. But I remember when we first got that, like I said, the whole world opened up to me. And I think I was in like 6th or 7th grade at that point when we finally got a computer. And like I have kind of a learning disability in that I have a transfer issue. I can't get a lot of things from my head to my hands, to like doing a lot of writing and things like that. So essays were always an issue for me. But getting that computer made it to where I could type and write things out and it be legible and able to get my thoughts in order, because once I wrote it down, then I could go back through it and edit it. Which has helped me out a lot in my life. But yeah, like you guys were saying, you were basically grew up with it. Like I grew up with a lack of it for quite a bit of my childhood. But then once I got that little bit of taste, then like I said, the world opened up to me and I couldn't get enough of it. Yeah, technology's really kind of been a whole thing. And then up to the point of now that I've built my own computer and have my own kind of battle station going is kind of a testament to learning on your own, as we were talking about, education and being able to learn anything you want to learn. That's basically what I do. I was never good in school with a structured set of what I needed to have. But now when I pick up a subject, I learn everything I can about it before I give it up.
And that's the key part, right? Like you have to, because when you're teaching yourself, and I'm a firm believer in reading. I don't care if you're reading on a device, on your phone, whatever. If I love books, right? So I just love reading. And I was very fortunate that even though I was raised in an extremely Christian background, I was encouraged to read whatever I could get my hands on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of implanted in me that desire to see all sides. And that's the piece that people are missing, right?
Mm-hmm.
With today's algorithms, with today's technology algorithms, you are only shown what you linger on, right? So if you watch this video about, Trump, guess what? You're going to get a lot of Trump shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you watch this video about Biden, and I'm talking about like if you make a brand new account, right? And you sit there and watch a 15-minute video about Trump, you're going to get a bunch of Trump. 15-minute about Biden, you're going to get a bunch of Biden. And that can shift and change your perspective because you are not being exposed to both sides.
Right. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, that my algorithm, like for YouTube, is so messed up right now because of the amount of different interests that I have. I'm being shown just all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that. but it all, kind of correlates to different things that I am interested in. And so now I've got airsoft stuff. I have political stuff. I have hunting stuff, fishing stuff, gaming stuff, Dungeons and Dragons stuff, Call of Cthulhu stuff. Like, it is everywhere. And I feel like whatever algorithm they're trying to use is going in overdrive with me, trying to figure out what the hell to give me to keep my interest.
Yeah. I
Well,
feel
yeah,
like
I mean,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, God forbid you YouTubed Aleister Crowley.
Oh, I did.
I
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I absolutely did.
mean, I feel like I have successfully confused my YouTube algorithm to the
Mhm.
point that it doesn't even know what to give me. For lack of a better term, YouTube just kind of shrugs, goes, "Is this it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll try it out."
Yeah, my
But you also
FBI guy
live
has
on
fully
YouTube.
given up. Like, he's
Yeah.
like,
Like,
I've put you on every list that I can find. That's all I got. He just sits back in a recliner now and just watches TV
Yeah,
all day.
and the crazy thing for me is because my ADHD is just so wild, like so unmedicated, that like I'm never on one subject long enough for it to be a pattern. So the algorithm's like, I don't know what to give you. Like, tell me what you
Yeah.
want. You
And that's
know,
a very
it's like,
ADHD thing for sure.
yeah. And it's just like, do you want Forge stuff? Do you want D&D stuff? Do you want SCP stuff? Do you want Call of Cthulhu stuff? Do you want Tool stuff? Do you want? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go with whatever. It's just
Yeah.
Something
and I mean,
pops
and
up. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Let's click that.
yeah, exactly.
and
You know,
people who don't dig further than the surface, like it's such a detriment. Like I think during the last election cycle, I saw some kind of statistic that was something like 80% of people under the age of 35 believe that like everything on Facebook was true. And I'm sure I'm paraphrasing that because I think it was something like believe that all the news on Facebook, like it's some kind of crazy statistic that made me step back and be like, wow, like this crazy website that I first logged into in like 2005, right, is now literally shaping the opinions of millions, hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah.
And
You remember when you
I
could
don't
only
even
get
think,
onto it when you were a college student?
yeah,
You
yeah,
had to have
that's
a
when I got onto it.
college email address. Yeah, that's when I
Yeah,
got onto it.
I happened to have a be in college at the time, and they were like, "Hey, there's this crazy." I was like, "What is this thing?" It
It's exactly
seems
what
like a
happened to me.
cleaner MySpace.
Exactly. That's the only reason I got on it.
I still
But
have my.
Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say. I was just gonna say that I still have my I still have my Hotmail email address that I created back in elementary school.
I do not have any of my email addresses from like 15 years ago.
I have my original email address that I had back when dial-up was a thing.
No, mine's long gone.
I can't get into it because I can't remember what password I set for it. But yeah, it's still a thing. It was my backup for my Gmail account for years, and I was like, if something happened, I could never get my Gmail back. But yeah, I still technically have that email address, and
That's
yeah,
hilarious.
that's hilarious. It's funny.
I think that's something. I think that's something a lot because a lot of us of a certain age, because I feel like we're all kind of around the same age.
We are.
Like we have a certain. We approach technology with kind of an old school bent, right? Because I still do stuff like if there's something really important, it's saved in 3 different places, right? One is my everyday, one is like, on the hard drive somewhere, and one is a disconnected like, air gap hard drive.
I'll still print off hard copies of stuff, just to make sure that I have a hard copy of it somewhere and put in like a fireproof safe just in case, because you never know.
Yeah.
Things can happen. You lose power, and then you can't access any of your electronic stuff. It doesn't matter whether it's on 16 different drives. You can't access it. But I can pull that piece of paper out.
Unless you are Aleister Crowley and you have a really powerful wand.
Exactly. I wish I had a powerful wand, but
apparently he had a very powerful wand.
A very popular one too.
Very popular one.
I want to briefly discuss this. I'm hesitant to talk about this only because in my history I talked about it so much that it became annoying. So I'm just like,
If it's Magic the
Muslim.
Gathering, I swear to God, BSK.
It's not. I was never that much into Magic the Gathering, but no.
There's no K there.
Yeah. But when it comes to, like, let's say religion, for example, like the closest thing I got to, I feel like I'm wording this really poorly, but I'm going to follow through. The closest thing I got to, like, a religious event or a spiritual event was when I was first introduced to the band Tool. And my father is an audiophile. Like, he built speakers. He's all about, like, quality sounds, the ratios of, like, volume and, like,
The bit
equalizing
rate, all that super crazy
all of
stuff.
that. Like,
Yeah.
insane. So, like, I grew up with, like, amazing quality sound with, like, a music library that was just so vast, except for country. But I was introduced to Tool when I was really young, and then during my teenage years, I started to really delve into, like, the lyrics of Tool, and I started to, like, find a lot of corresponding, like, thought systems and beliefs, and I found out eventually that, like, Tool was really good at coming up with, for lack of a better term, a blueprint for self-discovery and self-improvement by identifying your own flaws and moving past them, not by ignoring them, not by demolishing your negative traits, but acknowledging them and finding a way to work around them. And it was really cool. And the funny thing is, there's a lot of stuff that is, you could almost say, borrowed by Aleister Crowley, like from Aleister Crowley's stuff that Tool has incorporated into their music. Like, one of the things that they have as, like, their symbol is, like, this. It's like I think it's like a hectogram. It's like a 7-pointed pentacle.
Heptagram.
Um, and apparently it is a. I had it up for a moment, but apparently it's a symbol that was used commonly in the with Aleister Crowley stuff. With I think it's called
Thelema.
Thelema. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's Crowley's influence it is huge. I mean, and it's reflected in like literally all modern occult thought. And when I say occult, I'm using it in the manner of, like, magic with a K, right? So the stuff that you can find at, those bookshops, right? He influenced all of that. Sex magic is basically all Crowleyan, right? Like, but he also influenced popular culture. Like, he was on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Band from the Beatles, right?
Right.
He's everywhere. He's absolutely everywhere. And his thinking, in my own personal opinion, like, his thinking was the catalyst that basically caused, like, the reawakening in the 60s.
I can see that.
I don't think that we ever would have gotten there, or at least not gotten there when we did, without someone like Crowley just kind of, like, not even, just straight up ignoring the boundaries.
Yeah.
You know what
I
I
mean, and just to add clarity, the word I was looking for is heptagram,
Heptagram.
which is a symbol that Tool has used many times. Apparently, it has to do more specifically towards the drummer Danny Carey. But there is a lot of occultism. But I mean, Tool is I am a Tool fanboy, but Tool is a very complicated beast.
No,
And
I've never heard you talk about Tool ever.
All right. On that note, we've been talking for about 2 hours now, and kind of in conclusion, as far as where we started to where we are, welcome to the Tangent Zone. We've covered quite a bit, but the conclusion of which is that Aleister Crowley did have quite a bit of influence on our lives today, not just in the past, leading us on many different paths, which, like our conversation today, has gone in multiple different directions. Being our first guest, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on.
It's been great. It's been great. Anybody who's listening, smash that like button. Like these guys, like they're having honest conversations, which we need to have more of.
Agreed. With that, we're going to go ahead and close this out. Again, I am Antler Freak, my co-host BSK, and ESO. If we can get some information together as far as any other podcasts or content, I will put that in the description below. Thanks, and have a great one.
We're diving deep, no script, no plan. And your freaking BSK, yeah, we take a stand. From the battlefield to anime dreams, breaking down history, ripping through the seams. Joystick warriors and stories untold, mixing up the real and the brave and the bold. No filter, no leash, we let it all go. Get ready, cause we're taking you below. Welcome to the Tangent Zone, where the thoughts run wild.